Hey, everybody, welcome to the Grow Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Kevin McNulty, and this is your personal development school of growth, where each week my guests and I will bring and break down big ideas and practices that will help you learn, grow, and succeed in life. Thanks for checking us out. Now let the growth begin. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Grow Yourself, your personal development school of growth. You know, I've always been fascinated by the idea of influence, why some people or ideas just stick while others, certain messages, moments, conversations influence us long after it happens, while others just seemingly disappear. In leadership, in business, even in everyday life, being influential perhaps comes down to just that, not just getting people's attention, but earning a place in their memory. Because if they don't remember you, I think it's common sense to suggest then, or remember you or what you said or whatever the case might be, they simply can't act on it and won't act on it. And that's why I'm really looking forward to this conversation with Dr. Carmen Simon. She's a cognitive neuroscientist who spent years studying how the brain pays attention, remembers, and then decides to act. Because I think her insights on memory and influence connect directly to how we grow as individuals, as leaders, as communicators in business and marketing, whatever the case might be. So perhaps that's where we'll go today. We'll ask questions like, what does it really mean to be influential? And by the way, what does brain have to do with it? So, as mentioned, Dr. Carmen Simon is a cognitive neuroscientist and one of the world's leading experts on how memory shapes influence. She spent more than a decade studying how the brain pays attention, retains information, and decides to act. And she's helped companies, little companies like Google, GE, and McDonald's turn insights into practical strategies for communication and leadership. She's also the chief science officer for Corporate Visions, the author of Impossible to Ignore and Made to Look. I love that, by the way. She's a sought after keynote speaker known for showing people how to make their ideas memorable, persuasive, and impossible to ignore. By the way, I've learned that she's not only brilliant in her field, but she's also very warm and down to earth. And so I'm truly grateful that she's here joining us on Grow Yourself and willing to share her hard earned wisdom. Dr. Carmen Simon, thank you so much for being here on Grow Yourself.
Kevin, thank you for inviting me and welcome everyone. It's exciting to talk about the brain because everybody in your audience has one. And sometimes when I make that remark, people giggle because
Yeah.
you don't see the evidence of it. But it's true. Everyone that you're addressing and you're trying to influence, including yourself, has a brain. And it's important to understand how the brain works.
No, that's fantastic. Fantastic. So listen, before we get started, Carmen, would you mind just telling the audience a little bit about you? Who is Carmen Simon?
I'm a cognitive neuroscientist, and that just simply means that I use some fun toys to peek underneath the human skull and understand what happens in the brain as we are
Mm,
exposed, especially to business content. So the tools that I use are EEG caps. Have you seen those caps
I
that you place
have.
on people's
Yes.
scalps? And through the electrodes that I place there, I get to record an electroencephalogram signal. These are the brain waves that get generated in reaction to stimulation. The stimulation that I typically study includes various persuasive, or they should be persuasive presentations, websites, sometimes even physical products. And on the chest, I also have an electrode for an electrocardiogram signal. I also use an eye tracker. I also use this device that's called a GSR. It stands for galvanic skin response. So what happens is anytime you're faced with some stimulation, let's just say you're watching a movie and you have a reaction, doesn't matter if it's positive or negative, but a reaction nonetheless, your skin changes. I should say the conductivity of your skin changes. So I capture that change if it occurs. I say if it occurs because sometimes business content is not intense enough to
Mm.
ignite that many reactions or as many as a movie would. And I'm mentioning these signals because in my profession, you're asking who is Carmen Simon. I'm very, very strict in terms of making logical inferences from the neuroscience studies that we conduct. And you can only make logical inferences when you have an accumulation of signals in the sense of bypassing self-reports. Because if
I
you're
see.
wondering, where do my audiences pay attention as I try to influence them? Or what is it that keeps them motivated, keeps them motivated? Or what is it that they like or dislike? And when you ask them, people will tell you, but quite often those self-reports are not reliable.
Mm.
Have you ever been in a situation where you ask somebody a question and you kind of sense that they're telling you what they think you want to hear?
Yes,
And
all the
sometimes they might
time.
overplay or
Hmm.
downplay an emotion. Like we're
Yes,
talking about in a marriage situation, you sometimes choose your words very carefully if you want to influence the
right.
next moment in your favor.
That's right.
And because self-reports are quite often not reliable, you want to get to the brain and body in an implicit kind of way. So that is something that I strive for. So as we have our conversation and we'll get to some practical guidelines, keep in mind that those guidelines come from implicit reactions, not explicit reactions to business content.
And what do you mean by implicit versus explicit in this context?
So imagine that, let's just say that I wanted to see your reaction to a marketing presentation or a sales presentation or an internal presentation, because we were
Uh,
talking about personal growth, perhaps within a team. So somebody has shown you a stimulus of sorts, and then they can ask you explicitly, how did you like that? And
mm,
then you'll say, yes, I liked it. No, I didn't like it. Hardly ever would you say, no, I didn't like it. Or they'll
mhm.
say, what captured your attention and for how long? Or what kept you motivated? Or what got you tired during that segment? And people
Interesting.
will say explicitly, they will verbalize those answers, or they could write them down if you're sending out surveys. But when you're using these biometric tools such as the EEG caps, electrocardiogram signals, the eye tracker, the GSR, you're not asking people how much they liked something. You're not asking them what
Mm,
caught their attention. You're not asking them what got them tired. You're not asking them about the cognitive overload that they experienced here versus here. You're simply gathering implicitly what happened in the brain and
fascinating.
the body, the millisecond that it happened to. That, by the way, is one of the differences between using EEG technology versus fMRI, because I could put your brain in an fMRI machine, but by the time I showed you a stimulus and you reacted to it cognitively, affectively, and the scanner takes a picture of your brain, a second or more elapses, and that can be an eternity in cognitive and affective processes. Whereas with the EEG, we
Interesting.
stay on the surface or not going deep into the brain. Our corporate clients, by the way, are not allowing us to surgically implant the electrodes. But even as you're staying on the surface, you're capturing reactions at a millisecond precision. So the
That's
temporal resolution is much better, at least for now, for EEG signals versus an
that's
fMRI one.
crazy. So if I'm watching a movie and and you're measuring it and you ask me, did that scare you? My ego
Mm-hmm.
might
Mm-hmm.
out explicitly I might say, nah, but implicitly might say something completely different, right?
Exactly. So this is why, as we conduct these studies, then what is it that we do with what we measure? First of all, what would be some variables that would have business consequences for all of you and personal growth consequences?
Mm.
We look at attention, motivation. We look at working memory, meaning that in order for people to remember you later, they have to remember you now. So something has to be held online this very moment. We look at fatigue. We look at mind wandering, by the way. Quite often the brain goes away and it's your responsibility to bring it back. You're talking about leaders that are listening to this show
Yeah.
and they want to be more engaging. It's a little bit harder to be engaging when somebody else's brain is mind wandering. So those are on the cognitive side. On the
Yeah.
affective side, we look to see what is the valence, meaning how much people enjoy an experience. That could be positive or negative. And we look at arousal, meaning how alert and awake people are during that experience. You're mentioning watching a movie and feeling a bit frightened at some point. What we would notice in terms of valence and arousal is that valence is negative, like you don't like that moment, and now arousal is really high, like you're really tense. Perhaps there's some anxiety, some unsettled feeling. Compare that to not liking an experience and being nonchalant about it. That's the worst that
Wow.
can happen, by the way, for any influential leader, because negative valence and low arousal is where memories go to die. It is
Explain
very,
valence. Explain valence a little bit.
valence means how much people enjoy the experience.
Very
So,
interesting.
for instance, tell me something that you really like in your life. Like you really could do that activity for hours on end.
Travel through Switzerland.
Oh, hey.
I'm just
and
saying.
and eating the chocolate and enjoying the
Correct.
cows.
And especially with my wife, we just came back in May and it was this constant feeling of joy for both of us.
Exactly. So imagine through some parts of Switzerland, you may be feeling this constant feeling of joy and maybe some excitement. Things keep you amped up, especially let's just take the precision of trains. It's like, oh, this is coming. It's
Yes.
arriving right here on time. And that feels really good. And your perhaps arousal is a little bit high and valence is positive. But you're traveling through some of those Swiss country roads and you're looking at the green hills and the cows grazing by, and you have this feeling of peace. That's still positive
Yes.
valence, but notice how the arousal is now a little bit
Interesting.
lower. So you're a little bit more relaxed. So, from a neuroscience perspective, those two dimensions, valence and arousal, are at the foundation of all other emotional states. Now, contrast that with something that you'd experience. Perhaps you go to some other country where the trains are never on time and you have to be somewhere promptly. That will put you in a negative valence, highly aroused state.
Yeah.
Or sometimes, like if you're doing laundry or you're doing some chores around the house, perhaps washing dishes, even in Switzerland, not the most exciting
Right.
activity, but you're not really all that amped up about it. It's like, I'm
Right.
just going to put up with this.
Yeah.
And this is why I'm mentioning from a business perspective and a practical guideline, you have to ask the question, how do I keep people away from negative valence, low arousal? By the way, as we look at memory, and we're mentioning that memory will influence your audience's decisions, don't feel like it's bad all the time to put people in the quadrant of negative valence, high arousal.
I'm so
So if you're
happy you're saying
tense for a
this.
moment, yes, because of that contrast, when you're not feeling at ease with something, and then your solution offers the contrasting point of that, that's where you're getting some memories to take shape.
Wow, boy, I'm going to have about 1,000 questions to ask. But let me do this before we move on because I don't want this moment to slip past us. I still want to ask about who is Carmen. Would you tell us a little bit about maybe where you were brought up, how you were brought up, just a little bit behind the scenes of that, sort of how it led you to become a neuroscientist?
Yeah, the behind the scenes, I think what would be useful for the audience is to know is that it's useful to pay attention to moments, as I mentioned, of tension and some anxiety. So I used to work for this telecom company, and I would be in charge of hiring vendors for specific educational programs.
Interesting.
And what I would notice is that we would have vendor day. And on that vendor day, we wouldn't have time for all the vendors to come in and express their value proposition. So they were trying to influence us. Then a few would spill over for some other days within that week. And then that week would be over. So then we have to reconvene and reflect on what we witnessed.
Oh
And
my.
what I noticed time and time again is how much we would forget after those days. We would forget our lives almost as quickly as things happened. And it was from those moments that I started reflecting on the fact that after just a little bit of time, most of the business content is gone. I've been able to replicate that, by the way, now in my own neuroscience practice, in the sense that I'm noticing that after 48 hours, 90% of content is gone. And I'm not so worried about
Interesting.
the rate of forgetting. I did notice that there's a bit of content that tends to stay there long term. Let's call that a metaphorical 10%. And I'm
Okay.
calling it metaphorical because sometimes, yes, people do remember a little bit more. Quite often, we remember a lot less, like 10% are really lucky if it stays there. So, as a practical guideline, as you're listening to this and through the experiences that I've had and the research that I've conducted, I want to say this: control your 10%. Do not leave that to chance. Because otherwise, what was happening to us in
Wow.
Vendor Day is quite a few people would have the exact same message. And after 48 hours and longer, it was hard for us to determine who said what. And we would tend to give credit to the more familiar source. So
Mm.
imagine quite a few people went in there and they would have exerted a lot of effort, but they exerted effort towards somebody else's benefit. This is why you want to clarify your 10% message in order to be in control of it. You can't control something you cannot clarify, and make sure that you associate with you. so that when you're presenting some value proposition, something that is critical to you, people will walk away and later on when they deliver it, they'll say, yes, this is what I remember. And that was associated with that entity, entity A, not B. Do you have a clear 10% message? I'm hoping that as you're listening to this, you write this down and at some point you also sit down and clarify what that is.
Wow.
And like for instance, my own 10% message, if you're saying, Carmen Simon, remember that phrase, control your 10%. That's what I've dedicated research to.
So, can you give me an example? I do want to point out one thing
Yeah.
and ask you something about it later on, about how neuroscience and AI are converging, if you
Mm.
will. But I want to ask you about a video that I saw where a a robot, an AI robot, introduced you. Is this along the lines of what you're talking about here? I mean, I'll never forget the robot introducing you, right? I mean, are we still talking the same thing here?
It's possible that that would have been part of getting people in a ready state to remember what
Okay.
was happening before. So I'm glad that you're mentioning this
Okay.
because now that we have this mantra for our conversation,
Yeah.
control your 10%, so that you can then leave memory traces on people's minds so that you can then influence their behavior a little bit better. Or even for your own self, you can have a 10% message that motivates your own behavior and changes it, like an affirmation, for example.
Mm.
So pick that message. Now we can discuss what are some practical guidelines that get us to a memorable 10% message, because not all of them are memorable in some way. And one technique that you just alluded to is priming the brain to remember. You see, quite often the reason we don't remember something is because we don't pay attention to begin with. And one of the
Oh,
reasons we don't pay attention to begin with is because we're not in a ready state. So if you're used to people being introduced at an event by another human, then that's one kind of priming. But if suddenly a robot introduces that person, you see how it's a bit of an element of surprise. It gets the brain in
absolutely.
a ready state. So now I'm more present here versus mind wandering.
Very interesting. And I, like you, am a speaker, keynote speaker. And, I remember when I was getting into it, some of the, let's just say the tactics or strategies that they would talk about when you opened the keynote would be to say something like, imagine that you are standing at the top of, the Matterhorn, right? Is they're doing the same thing? They're setting up, they're trying to get you to focus in and prepare to remember.
Yes, that's a good primer, and there's magic in that word imagine because what you're doing to the brain, in addition to priming it, is you're placing it in a visual spot. A lot of our listeners could
I
learn
see.
from this because sometimes in business content, especially, we stay so abstract. Like I was working with a company the other day, and they're talking about the intelligence communication fabric. So if I
Hmm.
said that phrase to you, does something specific come to mind?
Well, I'm just giving you the side eye here.
Whereas, and it's a very smart value proposition, by the way, once you understand what that is. But initially, it's very difficult to place yourself in a physical context. And we need physical context if we add to our practical guidelines that are related to how do we make our 10% message memorable. One of the criteria is to have a message placed in a physical context. Context is not what we remember, it's how we remember. So, for example,
Oh
if I
my.
asked you, what were you wearing 2 days ago? Would you be able to tell?
No, couldn't tell you yesterday.
But see, even though you may not necessarily answer that question, I guarantee that what just happened in your brain right now, you're asking, what day was it 2 days ago?
Oh, very
And then
interesting.
if you go, where was I 2 days ago? The moment that you ask that question, now some memories are starting to be revived. And is the context. So do you know where you were 2 days ago?
2 days ago, what is today? Wednesday?
See?
Yes, 2 days ago. Yes, I do actually
Monday.
remember. Yeah,
Monday. So now
Monday.
that you
Yeah.
know where you were, can you remember a little bit more clearly what you were wearing?
Let's see. Yes, I actually can. I was wearing jeans and a sports coat. Yeah, I do.
Yeah, there you go. So the
Interesting.
moment that you invoke a physical context, that prompts a lot of memories. And we can go into the why this is happening in the brain, but perhaps our audiences will be more interested into the practicality of it all.
Yeah.
So if you have a message and you want to make sure that other people remember it, place it in a physical space. Like when you said, imagine you're at the top of the Matterhorn, instantly I'm there. You don't even have to show me a PowerPoint slide around this.
I
You don't have to
see.
show us a physical picture. You're invoking something that is critical to the brain. By the way, with this, we can debunk the myth. And the myth is that you hear people say, some people are visual learners, some are auditory learners, some are have you heard that
I
before?
have heard that. Absolutely.
So I'm hoping that as your audience members are listening to this, they never repeat this again because there is no such thing as an auditory learner. Primarily, we are visual beings. We're all for if you are visually able, you are a visual being. 60 to 70% of your body receptors, which is how you take in the world, you build perceptions. You're talking about perception early on, and you start building memories for yourself, then for others. Those are based on visual receptors. We are visual beings. And when you help somebody else's brain see, that is one of the greatest techniques you can use for growing your
Wow.
career and for influencing others.
That is so fascinating. So let me ask this and put this in a specific context. So if we're talking about influencing people, how we influence others, I can think of it from a leadership standpoint. I can think of it, as a coach, all sorts of ways. But maybe could you take us into a networking event and use some of these ideas that you're talking about, the 10% and all these other sorts of things. And you're going to meet people, you don't know that many of them, and you want them to remember you and or your message. Can you take us through something like that? Because
So,
reason I ask is because people often ask me just randomly, or maybe mention, I'm so bad at networking. I don't know how to do it. What do I do? And these sorts of things. And so that's why I'm bringing this one to the table.
yeah, let's use these principles in a networking event. And that means that you would have something that you know typically attract attention through some trial and error because you can be your own scientist and observe what is it that gets
Mm,
people to smile or react
yeah,
in some way. That means that you're implicitly preparing your own 10% message. And that could be just about your being, it can be about your business, it could be about a mission that you have.
very
So,
nice.
as we're talking about earlier, people forget 90% of things that you share. What is your 10 then, your 10% message? Make sure that you clarify it to yourself first. Don't walk in there thinking that an
Mm,
improvisation is going to work because hardly ever, sure, there may be some exceptions where you improvise in the moment and the context calls for something, but have something that is prepared. In my case, if I just met you and you ask me what it is that I do or what is it that I'm all about, I'm cautious about the word passion, by the way, because as a scientist, I like things that are
me too.
measurable.
Yeah,
Passion is a little bit harder to measure, but when you
yeah.
say energy, that is a little bit easier to measure. So if you ask somebody, what do you have energy for? I would
Mm,
say I have energy for the fact that people forget 90% of what you share with them after 2 days, and the little they remember is random. So if you're looking for influencing others or even yourself, it's important to control that 10%. This is what I dedicate my energy to. So
wow.
you're more memorable versus forgettable. By the way, should you be memorable all the time? I'm hoping the answer is no, because
Mm.
if you're that memorable all the time, you couldn't have customers, you couldn't be married if people remembered everything that you said and did. So thank goodness that the brain forgets at some point. So for networking, we said principle one, clarify your 10% message. We talked about making things visual. So you invited us to come to Switzerland. You invited us to be at the top of a mountain there. Get the brain to physically see something versus speaking in abstract all the time if you can. So the
Wow.
word imagine is definitely a good one, or make things turn abstract into something that is concrete.
I've also heard where like when a person and I've practiced it and it seems to work okay that when someone asks me, what do you do, that I bring up sort of an anecdote or a story to the table. I say, well, have you ever been like bullied by somebody in the workplace? And they go, yeah. and I say, well, I help people learn how to deal with bullies or something like this. Am I
Hmm,
moving in the
hmm.
right direction?
Definitely so. So imagine the moment that you put us at the workplace,
Yeah.
already you brought us
Oh.
into a physical context.
Mm.
For a while there, I was so hooked on the Golden Girls. Do you know the Golden Girls?
Listen, that's my wife's that's her space, man. She'll tell
And
you everything.
if our listeners are they know about the show,
Hmm.
one of the characters there that you can definitely learn from in terms of your personal growth, in terms of your influence, is Sophia.
I knew you were going to say that.
Sophia
Hmm.
has what you have, which is outstanding storytelling skills. And how
Mm.
do all her stories start? Picture it, synonym for imagine. It's 1927. It's Sicily, and the poor peasant girl is going down the street, and she's recognizing that she has no pepperoni to feed her family with. So imagine that in addition to
Yeah.
facts, by the way, here's another myth we can debunk. They're not different than stories. Facts are part of stories. We still know that it's Sicily and it's 1927. Unfortunately, what happens, especially for business messages, people insist on factual and abstract information so much at the absence of perceptive elements like it's Sicily. I'm going down the street. There is no pepperoni. See, those are elements that I can
Wow.
see and I can perceive.
Wow. Well, that is so fascinating. So I want to not quite back up, but back up just a little bit and just ask you, perhaps from your perspective, maybe even a neuroscience perspective, what is influence? What is it to be? What is happening? Uh, yeah, what is influence? I'll just leave
Let's
it at that.
define it from a way that brings ethics into it.
Oh,
And
interesting.
if we define it from that angle, that means convincing someone to change behavior in a way that serves you and them well.
Oh,
Otherwise, we then go on to the fine line of manipulation. And there is a gray one between influence and manipulation because if you define them both as changing behavior, but it serves only one of the parties that are involved, then that's not so good, is it? So, for all the principles that we're talking here, we're saying control your 10%. To control it, you have to clarify it, you have to prime the brain, you have to make things visual. We can add a few more guidelines as we go along. All of those you can use them for good influence or for bad manipulation.
yes. No, very, very well said. So, wow, that's pretty crazy. Now, I was listening to another, I think it was actually one of your intro video, your promotional video, if you will. And you said something about the idea that memory drives business success and it moves the world. That I don't know exactly what it means, but it caught my attention.
I'm glad that it did because of the word moves. The only reason we have a brain, by the way, is so we can move, physically move. A brain that doesn't move is not a brain that ultimately survives. And even though the brain hasn't changed much in the past 40,000 years, what has changed is our option in movement. These days, you can go in this direction. I know the show is about growing yourself. So you can grow yourself in this direction. You can move in this other direction because
Interesting.
perhaps it serves you better. The same for your audiences. They have options in moving toward you. Let's just say that you're fighting for an amazing cause and you're saying, move over here versus go over there. There's always movement in those that you're trying to address. And we know that every single movement that the brain makes, no exception, is based on what it remembers, not on what it forgets.
Oh my.
So when I say memory moves the world, it's a literal interpretation of this notion of every decision that you make for yourself or you're influencing other people how to make is based on memory.
Oh my. Oh, I feel like this is groundbreaking news, that, you know, I'm getting some real inside information. Now, you also go on to say that the brain doesn't store topics, it stores rewards. And to link your message to something rewarding. I mean, I think I could probably assume what that means, but I'd love to hear what you mean by that.
Yeah, let's think of some concrete examples. For example, I in the agency that I conduct, we conduct a lot of neuroscience studies. Then we use those principles in order to create physical business assets for our audiences. And sometimes we'll teach them how to do them for themselves, but sometimes they come to us to create those assets. Those assets are typically some persuasive presentations in a context that matters. And some of our most prominent clients come from the construction and architecture space. The
Mm.
reason for that is because those spaces are very competitive. So, Kevin, imagine that you are the owner of a hospital, and suddenly you want to redo a whole wing. Let's just say your oncology wing, and now you need a construction and an architecture firm to build it for you and make it in such a way that it looks good. So you would put out a request for proposal, an RFP. A few companies will bid for that proposal. There is no shortage of construction and architecture firms.
Mm.
And as you're looking at those bids that are coming in, you're selecting only the top three. And now to those top three, you say, I have vendor day. Remember vendor day?
Mm-hmm.
Come on in and convince me that I should choose you and not the other two. So there's a
Oh
winner
boy.
and there's a loser in this whole situation. So that better be the most influential presentation that you give because those are high dollar projects. So in a recent project, we were helping this construction company compete to get the business of the company Louis Vuitton. Have you heard of the brand Louis Vuitton?
Yes, of course. Mm-hmm.
And Louis Vuitton wants to build not one, but two buildings in Beverly Hills and where else but Rodeo Drive. For that project, they have selected Frank Gehry. I don't know if you have heard of Frank Gehry
I don't
Architects.
I don't believe so.
There's now a company where they have partners, but Frank Gehry Partners started with the one Frank Gehry. And Frank Gehry, if you go and Google him, he's the architect that would create these structures that make it look like the future has just arrived, or that this giant sea creature is now part of your city. He would do things with steel that you'd never thought
Oh
steel
wow.
could be capable of doing. There's not one right degree angle in a Frank Gehry design. Everything is curvy and flowy. Yet again, things you wouldn't associate with steel. So, of course, Louis Vuitton chooses a very futuristic and atypical architect for the project. Now they're
Yeah.
looking for a construction company to now build this thing. And the message, the 10% message that we came up with for this occasion was, what did we want people to remember? Louis Vuitton and also Frank Gehry, because you have to convince them too. The 10% message was build like the world is watching. And the reason for that message is because imagine this. This is Beverly Hills. This is Rodeo Drive. This is Louis Vuitton. This is Frank Gehry. In a few months, this is going to become one of the most watched construction sites on the planet. Every other architect, every fashion designer, every engineer will want to know how this thing is done. So when you're talking about the brain doesn't have energy for topics, it has energy for rewards. We always look at the construction of a
Mm.
10% message, and you can use that for yourself at those networking events from the angle of what does this message do for you, the audience? Because, yeah, it's sure you could go for topics like we're going to finish this project on time and on budget. But there's always more to the story than just topics like schedule and money. And even you were mentioning earlier on ego. The
Mm.
deeper you look, the more you start wondering, what does the brain really want out of this equation? And what their brains want is to be so popularized and be put in such a good light, not a bad light, because construction can go wrong. So that's why a message like build like the world is watching has a stronger reward than we'll build on time and on budget because other
Oh
construction
wow.
companies can say the same thing.
Wow. That is so fascinating. Okay. So I want to also ask about the three principles and then maybe get you to take me through building my 10%, if you will, about anything. It does. I'm not trying to
Sure.
get a free consultation here from you, but I'd love to see how you might do this with somebody. So first of all, would you talk about, I think there's three principles, right? To controlling what others remember or something like this. You've
Well, we can
spoken
get
about them,
to
but I'd love to hear them in sequence here.
yeah, no, you can get to an even longer checklist. So let's summarize the ones that we have so far. We said control your 10% is by far the most important, our umbrella message of the entire conversation. Do not leave that to chance. You leave that to chance, by the way, this is what will happen. especially in a network event, you will be meeting a few people. One person will take away one message, another person will take another message, another person will take another message. This is detrimental, especially when you're dealing with groups, because you want to influence not just one person. You typically want to influence a group of people, and you want all of them to remember the same thing so that they move in your favor. Remember,
Gotcha.
movement is
Move in
based
your
on what you
favor.
remember.
Wow.
Yes. And we said control your 10%. So how do you get there? First, you clarify it. Then we also said to make sure that you prime the brain, you get it in a ready state. Then we said make sure that the brain can see it. Build like the world is watching. You can picture these journalists and these paparazzi around Beverly Hills on that construction site taking constant pictures. So you want to make sure that those pictures are showing something good. Make it visual, make the brain see what is important. We
Wow.
also said associated with a reward. Don't just mention topics. Many people are capable of listing topics. Make sure it's topic plus reward. If I build like the world is watching, you're going to be in a good position. So what else can we add to that checklist? Well, let's not forget that repetition is the mother of memory. If you have exerted so much effort into coming up with that 10% message, by the way, build like the world is watching, is that the first message that came to our minds? That was version 17 out of many trials of what could work for this situation.
Wow.
So you put a lot of effort into clarifying this 10% message. Don't just say it once, because a one-time trial is hardly ever impactful enough in order to be memorable long
Oh,
term.
wow.
One trial learning can happen, it's not impossible, but you would have to have so much emotion associated with that message. Like you would have to either physically hurt someone or take all of your clothes off or throw them in a cold plunge in order for them to associate that message with just a one trial exposure.
Very
For
interesting.
regular people in regular networking events or business settings, usually you don't have that much arousal that is associated with the message. So therefore, repetition is what will rescue it. So clarify it and then say it again, 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 and then say it again. And in between these segments, that's where you add in those beautiful stories that you're mentioning and the anecdotes. By the way, one of the things that upsets us in neuroscience is when people say simplify your complexity. And I'm saying don't. The only thing that must be simple in your conversation with others, or maybe you have formal presentations that you're making, is your 10% message, a few supporting points. But beyond that, complexify. The brain synchronizes better with that which is complex versus that which is simple. So use the 90 to be in service of the 10% message. Don't have simple, 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 and then I'm simplifying yet again, because then it's no wonder that the brain goes away for something that's a little bit more
Oh, that's
enticing.
fascinating. Yeah, I mean that's just almost counterintuitive to me
Mm-hmm,
because we
mm-hmm,
we think, yeah. In fact, I often maybe even boast that one of the things that I do in my programs or whatever is I do simplify the complex or the abstract. And so maybe I'm going to rethink that, you know.
could we make it, since we're all working on your 10% message, let's just say that that was
Yeah.
one of the contexts, is not so much about simplifying complexity, but it's more so about helping somebody's brain manage it well.
Okay, I
Because
love that.
let's just be realistic. Life is not getting any simpler. It's
No.
always getting more complex. Business is complex. Living is complex and quite often sad. So we need somebody to help us not remove all of that, because we don't want to live in an unrealistic bubble. You want somebody's brain to manage complexity. So that's where Kevin comes
Oh,
in.
goodness, that is so good. Can I take that? I mean, that is
Yes,
so,
take it. Yes,
so, so,
yes.
so good. That is so good. Oh, I had this brilliant question in my head. Now I don't remember what the question was, but
We're
um,
talking about
oh,
complexity. We're talking about
yeah,
simplifying.
yes.
Yes.
No, I remember. Uh, let me pose this one idea, because I know you work with leaders and companies and business and such as well. So let's just say a leader came to you. Let's say it's a C-suite, and they want to work with you and they want you to help them become more influential within their
Mhm.
organization. I don't know what the scenario could be. Maybe they're just not being as successful with how people perceive them or how they come across or whatever the case might be. They've
Mhm.
gotten some feedback. How would you approach that? I don't. wouldn't say go through the whole thing, but how might you, and you don't have to like start from A to Z, but how would you approach somebody like that? How would you sort of guide them?
It's the same framework that we've been discussing so far. So I would start from the same premise. We mentioned that your audiences will forget 90% about what you share the moment that you close the door or the Zoom link. And the
Mm,
more time passes by, it gets even more faded. I was
mm,
it's good to be humble in the situations too, by the way, because I have to practice what I preach. So I was just looking at some memory results from a neuroscience study that I'm just completing right now. And in this one instance, people listened to a video from a leader. You're talking about leadership training. And that video was 4.5 minutes. And for most of the answers, I'm seeing those 4.5 minutes reduced to one sentence. So if you think about it, if you speak at a rate of, let's just say, 140 words per minute, you multiply 140 words by 4.5 minutes, that's a lot of words that will have just been reduced to maybe 7 or 8 words after
mm.
48 hours and beyond. So for any leader, if you're feeling that they're not being heard or people are not following their steps, it's good to have that moment of humility. These people just simply don't remember. So
Fair
then,
enough.
how do I help them remember? Well, clarify what it is that is important. We're talking about politics briefly right before the show, and we agreed that politicians, love them or hate them, they can teach us something very good, which is pick your message, clarify your 10% message, and then go there, and then go there again and stay consistent. Do you remember Brexit?
Yes, of
What was
course.
the
Mhm.
mantra of Brexit? It was take back control. They never deviated from that, whether you agreed with the movement or you
I
disagreed
see.
with the movement, it didn't matter. The message was set, and then it was always the same constant. It was
Yeah,
always
very
take back
interesting.
control.
Because a fair amount of the people thought, no, that it would never happen. And it did.
Yes, yes. So as a leader, if we're working together, the very first prompt is what is your 10% message? What do you want people to not just remember, but also act on? Those two things have to go together. This is why we're invoking this notion of a reward, because the moment that you're clarifying that 10% message and you're also associating with a reward, take back control. Do you recognize that one, alluding to control is one of the biggest rewards you can give to somebody's brain, because a brain that is not in control is not a brain that knows where to move next. You're giving me control. That means I'm more likely
I
to
see.
improve my biological fitness. That is a
I
very
see.
strong reward to include
Very
in your
interesting.
message. So as a leader, if you think I want people to follow, I want them to act on this and that, clarify the 10% message. And as we work together, we're thinking, what is really the not just a reward, but the best reward of the ones that you can offer? Because there are quite a few rewards out there. I mean, you can promise somebody efficiency, you can promise somebody comfort, you can promise somebody, dare we say, joy. I like that you mentioned joy as you're traveling
Hmm.
through Switzerland. You can promise them saving time and, of course, saving money. There are a few rewards that you can go for, but always ask, out of all of these, what is really the most important and relevant right now?
Wow, that is so fascinating. You know, I have to say this that I don't know if it's an intentional or not, but from the moment that we have started speaking, I can't even tell you the number of times that you mentioned 10%. And so you are certainly practicing what you preach. Again, whether that was intentional or not, I mean, you've said it 25 times or something, and I think that's a big, that's a pillar in your work, right? In what you convey to people is that clarify that
It's a
10%.
exactly, it's a pillar, and as you take back control and you're in charge of that 10% message, then all of our listeners can do the same thing, in the sense of select something that you think you are about, and then phrase it from not where you're sitting, because that's easy to do and tempting. Phrase it from your audience's standpoint, especially if you plan to influence others and not
Wow.
just yourself.
Wow. That is
And I'm
so
saying this because if we go back to messages like "Build like the world is watching," that was a relevant and rewarding 10% message in that context. If we look at the same construction company bidding for something else, like, for example, we are looking to win the project that would have invited them to construct some apartment buildings somewhere here in Newport Beach, California. And when you're constructing apartments, that's not the best construction site, really. Like you'll never use a message like "build like the world is watching"
I
because
see.
you'd rather not have the world watching those things.
Gotcha.
In that in that context, what was the 10% message? If you're thinking about that project owner, what does a project owner of a site like that really want? They want those apartments built as fast as possible with quality,
I see.
obviously, but as fast as possible so that they can rent them as fast as possible. So the
I
10%
see.
message in that context became deliver on our promise, which is our construction company will obviously help you on time and with quality.
Sure.
We deliver on our promise so that you can deliver on yours. Because we
Oh,
ask
Lord.
of all the rewards that are important to you, what is really something that will keep you going for 3 years?
Yeah.
It is this notion that this is going to be done very fast. So I can deliver on my promise, which is I'm going to be renting these things very quickly.
Wow. You just nailed that because, and I mean, it just was this big aha moment that you said earlier that to say that, we'll build this on time and under budget or within budget or whatever, you
Yeah.
could be boring. But when you say that we will build this on time and maybe ahead of time so that you can deliver,
Mm-hmm.
that is a whole different vision right there. That is the reward, right?
That's the reward as seen from their
From
perspective,
their
not just
perspective.
from yours.
And so the
Mm-hmm.
same thing that build like the world was watching, then I think I could probably read into that, but I assume that the reward is that if the world's watching, you're going to build something incredible, right? It's
Yes,
something like this.
exactly.
Okay.
And you're going to be put in the light that you enjoy. You're not going to be on the front page of the
Oh,
Beverly Hills Journal that says construction company has yet another faux power.
yeah,
That crane was left on Beverly
yeah,
Hills 2 more days than it
yeah,
needed to, and as a result,
yeah.
some negative consequences happen.
So, by the way, that bullet train that was supposed to happen in California, how would you recommend they rephrase that at this point? Whew.
It's so tough because some situations are complex, which is why the world
Sure.
needs you. As you're saying, I'm going to help you
They
manage
need you.
complexity because you have to constantly ask what is rewarding, and those
Okay.
rewards shift. So here is as we get, I imagine towards the end of our conversation,
Mm,
a study that people would learn from. This study took place at UC Berkeley in the 1940s.
mm.
And in 1940s at UC Berkeley, there used to be this scientist. His name was Otto Tinklepaw. Imagine that being your name.
Yeah.
So Mr. Tinklepaw would do this experiment. So he would grab this monkey, he would bring it in a study room, and the monkey would be sitting on a chair, and he would observe him hiding a piece of lettuce under one of the two cups.
Mm.
And the purpose of the experiment would be for the scientist to notice how long would it take the monkey to observe this action of the hiding of the lettuce, take the monkey out of the room, bring the monkey back up. How long would it take it to go directly where the lettuce
Oh my.
was hidden? So we would take the monkey about 2 minutes on average to observe the action, go out of the room, come back, find the lettuce right away. So he would repeat this experiment for about 2 months. And after about 2 months, Mr. Tinklepaw would change things. So in one of the sessions, the monkey comes back into the room, goes where he thinks the lettuce is hidden. But when he lifts the cup, he now finds a banana. And he's also excited because, obviously, given the choice between the two rewards, bananas, by the way, contrary to popular belief, are not so prevalent in monkeys' habitats. So when they
Oh.
find one, it really is a treat. So then for the next 2 months, Mr. Tinklepaw would now hide a banana under one of the two cups. So after the 2 more months, the monkey comes back during one of the sessions, goes under the cup and expects to find the banana. And what does he find?
Oh no, not lettuce.
Yes, he finds the lettuce. He's also disappointed. He looks under the other cup, thinking, "What am I losing my mind?" Monkeys are smart, so once they start
Right.
repeating things, remember, repetition is the mother of memory. They will know what to do. He looks under the chair. He then starts getting aggressive, first with the chair, then with the scientist, and leaves the room not touching the lettuce.
Oh
Which
my
remember,
goodness.
months before, that was a very good reward. So, as you're talking about complex projects like bullet trains, as you talk about complex relationships in an organization, as you talk about even complex inner thoughts that you have, because you said it starts
Mm,
with the inside out,
hmm
always wonder what is my most current reward that can keep me going.
Goodness gracious. It can go in so many different directions around parenting. I mean, wow, 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 wow. Okay. So one last question before we ask you to tell folks where to find you. I just want to ask you about sort of the convergence between AI and neuroscience. What are you seeing? Maybe just share, what's happening in that realm, how one benefits the other, anything along that line. I just think AI is just, would you agree that AI may be greater than any invention, technology ever in the history of the world? Or no?
Ooh, I like the intensity behind that statement. I'm not sure if it's the ever, but I do like the word. What I'm noticing is this: the past 5 neuroscience studies that I have conducted, I have used AI in some capacity. And its greatest help for all of us is when we use it to try to coach ourselves. You as a coach, you as given your profession, you would enjoy this because you believe in the power of
Mm,
constantly upskilling. So know this as you think about AI and as you think about machine learning, per the name, what is its only goal in life? Let's call it that. For the machine, it is to learn. For us human being, do you have learning as a primary goal? Sometimes, sometimes not, because we have some social goals. You're talking about networking, we have
sure.
some physiological needs. Learning sometimes doesn't come as a priority. But in light of AI, and if we want to keep AI as our colleagues, we have to constantly upskill. And because AI has
Mm,
many great merits in many fields and many capacities, then use it to continue to sharpen your skills. So I've seen great benefits in the
yes.
human brain using
Yes.
AI to increase its ability to learn and its capabilities to then do things. The only time that I have seen AI not work so well, at least for now, is I've asked the research question, what happens when you show at least the business brain content that is designed by AI versus content that is designed by a human? And for now, we're not ready. We see through plastic very quickly.
Yes.
So don't think that in a moment that you go to an AI tool and say, generate this content, generate this image, especially images, and you're just also rejoicing in that productivity, that the impact of those segments is going to be greater than. For now, the human design is still winning.
I'm so happy that you are saying that because I agree with you. I do use AI. I wouldn't say that I'm unique in the way that I approach it, but I do use it to coach me. And I also use it as my number one masterminding partner. And it's very stimulating to,
Hmm.
even if I'm trying to put together a message, just I guess you could say, at least from my perspective, there's a certain amount of ethics that I'm not just going to say, you know, draft this letter to Carmen, and then I just send it to you. I'm
Yeah.
very meticulous about what I want it to say. And so it sometimes pops to me. As a matter of fact, sometimes I think I'm kind of bragging now. I think my ideas are better than AI, than chat, honestly. But anyways, I so appreciate that you say. I will ask one more question about that though, Carmen. Is when it comes to the memory and using AI, is there a danger there to maybe that is having a negative impact on your ability to remember or generate your own thoughts or something to this effect? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I like where you're going in terms of protecting our critical thinking
Yes, there you go.
abilities. Because, yeah, sure, you may still remember things, but are they worthy things? Just because
Mm,
you remember something doesn't mean that
mm,
it's always also
yeah,
useful or good. And the
yes.
more that you outsource some of your thinking processes and even writing processes, because writing quite often equals thinking, to a tool, then the less you do of that. So then when
Mm,
somebody else presents you with content and they're trying to influence you, how would you have the discerning power to know good from bad, to know something that will advance you versus not? So discipline yourself to, yes, sometimes you may be using AI for some outsourced skills, but at some
Yeah.
point, protect your own humanity and don't sell your soul to machine learning.
Oh, I love what you're saying. You are so freaking smart. I mean, you just blow my mind. I love, love, love talking to you. Carmen, is there anything that you'd like to share that maybe I didn't ask about or that I didn't guide you towards? Is there anything else that just you want to do that before I ask you to share how folks can find you?
Well, as we finish, per the framework that we established together,
Hmm.
let's remind our audiences why this conversation was important. It's important because the brain can only change itself and make decisions for the next movement based on what it remembers, not on what it forgets. So control your 10%. We got to some practical guidelines as to how to clarify your 10% message, make sure that the brain is ready to pay attention. That's what priming meant. We talked about making things visual, enable somebody else to see what you're seeing so that you can move in the direction that you're
Yeah.
showing.
Yeah.
We talked about the intensity of an emotion that can help with a 10% message. And we talked about associating with a strong and current relevant reward, not with rewards from the past. So already you have a checklist that can get you started. And in light of that, as you're using any or all of those principles, I guarantee that you will increase the likelihood of getting people to move in your favor.
Wow, just so well said, so succinct. I didn't even ask you. I mentioned your books, but I didn't ask, if you have a second, would you just share particularly about your books just a little bit if you've got a second?
Yes, the more popular ones are called Impossible to Ignore, and that one was specifically about creating memorable content so you can influence decisions. Now you understand why that was critical to write.
Hmm.
And then the more recent one that's called Made You Look, that one is a prequel because I was advocating for the fact that one of the reasons people don't remember and don't decide is because they don't pay attention to begin with. So that book is about the neuroscience of attention. And I look at, luckily, the brain doesn't just have one means of paying attention. We have multiple systems through which we pay attention. And that's where you learn about those and how to convert them into practical guidelines so that you can get attention, not just at work, but at home or as you travel through Switzerland, having a good time.
Yeah, goodness gracious. This is just so fascinating. Would you, Carmen, please share with the audience where they can find you? I know I saw your books. They're certainly on Amazon or, point them in a direction. Of course, we'll put it all in the show notes, but I'd love for you to just express where folks can get in touch with you or find your materials, your courses, whatever the case might be.
Yes, sure. So you can definitely find me on LinkedIn. It's Carmen Simon. And you might also enjoy the website of our agency, which is called Enhansive. So you can go to enhansive.com. And also, if you want to join me on this community that I'm building around memorable content and how to get there through brain science, the address for that is memorable.locals.com. I think
I
you'd
will
enjoy the small community that's in there and that gets very chatty around some concepts, and it's very practical, very hands-on.
I will absolutely be joining it and be sharing lots for others to enjoy. Well, listen, Dr. Carmen Simon, what an absolute treat this was. My goodness, this was one of the best podcasts and most enjoyable, informative that I've had in a while. And I thank you so much for being on Grow Yourself.
Oh, thank you for inviting me, and your audience is lucky to have you.
Thank you so much. Take care and God bless.
Thank you, Kevin. Stay in touch. Bye.
Okay.